Let's have a look at media now with media writer for the Australian newspaper, Sophie Elsworth. Thanks for joining us, Sophie.
Good to be here, Chris.
Hey, you had a good listen to an interesting radio interview last week. I didn't listen to all of it, but you do the hard work for us here, and that is the ABC, interviewing the ABC about the ABC. This was Sarah Ferguson, the 7:30 report host.
Tell us about a time where you got something terribly wrong.
I carry with me in a little sort of worry bag the things that I've got terribly wrong, but those are mostly to do with, work errors. But each one of them is burnt into my soul like I've been cupped. like a physician from the 18th century has taken a cup and placed it on my arm to remind me of this mistake or that mistake. So there's those, but none of them are too grave.
None of them are too great, hey? Now, we all make mistakes, of course, Sophie. Did we hear any detail about what these mistakes were?
Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, should I say, we did not, Chris. This was a 30-minute interview that Virginia Trioli, the ABC Melbourne radio mornings host, did with Sarah Ferguson. It was just a love fest. It was an ABC bubble love fest where they interview themselves and talk about how wonderful they are. And remarkably, Sarah talked about some of the mistakes she's made. Now, yes, we have all made mistakes, but she certainly made a very big one with that Putin-Trump story there, Chris, and she failed to mention that. So I thought that was something we could point out to our viewers tonight. Well,
exactly. I think it's quite amazing saying that she's never made a mistake, that none of them are too great. But there's this one. Have a look.
Tonight, we begin our special three-part investigation into the story of the century, the election of US President Donald Trump and his ties to Russia. The Kremlin's puppet master now has America dancing to his discordant tune. He couldn't have planned it better.
This is extraordinary, Sophie, isn't it? That was a three-part series, 3 hours of Four Corners, 3 weeks in a row. She spent months in the US, I think with her husband as a producer, putting it together. The ABC won't say how much it cost, but it must have cost taxpayers about $1 million or more. The whole thesis was that Vladimir Putin put Donald Trump into the White House. It's absolute nonsense, the whole lot of it, a kooky lefty conspiracy theory, but that's not much of a mistake.
Well, if that's not much of a mistake, Chris, I don't know what a decent mistake is, because that seems like a pretty almighty mistake to me. But as you and I know, the ABC are not good at admitting when they stuff up. They don't like putting out corrections and apologies, and this is a very fine example of that, Chris.
Yeah, I actually think that's one of the issues. I sent a complaint to the ABC about and said, you should correct this. It's all wrong, you should correct it. They said, oh, no, it was too long ago. It's too late for any complaints there, I mean, they've just got to... They have an obligation to the public to say, whoops, sorry, this was all a crocker, and we'd like to actually correct the narrative. But they soldier on. You've spotted another problem for the ABC last week when it came to Q&A, which now runs on Thursday nights, and they seem to fall over on their own diversity goals.
That's right, Chris. So Q&A had this panel on Thursday night, and one of the topics they were talking about was transgender athletes competing in sport. Now, interestingly, on the panel, there was no biological female athlete on the panel. So I spoke to Queensland weightlifter Deborah Acason, and she told me that she actually contacted Q&A to say, hey, your panel is not balanced and not fair, it has no representation of a female athlete to actually talk about this trans debate of transgender athletes competing against biological females. Consequently, remarkably, the ABC said, oh, hey, come on our show. They invited her in a last-minute scramble, and she was really quite, appalled, really, that it took her to contact the ABC to raise this issue. And, Chris, can I just finalise by saying I contacted the ABC for 3 days straight about this story to ask them what unfolded, and I got absolutely no response from their corporate affairs team, which is an absolute disgrace and something that the taxpayers pay for, and the ABC don't even bother to respond to.
Yeah, no accountability. Let's have a look at some of what Deborah said, because as you say, this is crucial. If it's about transgender competitors in sports, it's the females who are up against biological males. They're the people who count. They're the victims in this. And, of course, she was up against a biologically male weightlifter at the Olympics. Have a look.
And it felt like in that moment, lining up against Laurel Hubbard, to be presented for this competition didn't feel fair. So after, 20 years of jumping through the hoops and ensuring I'd done everything I needed to do to be an elite athlete, lining up against a transgender athlete just really felt at odds with what I had gone through for 20 years to ensure fairness in competition. I also was advised very strongly not to compete, not to comment on my feelings prior to the competition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important perspective. They could have got Catherine Deves on there, perhaps, who they ridicule for raising these issues, but it's the biological females who are the victims of this story. Just very briefly, I want to show you a little exchange from the National Press Club today. I was staggered that Anthony Albanese didn't get asked about the Shaquille O'Neal stunt on the weekend. I know the journos only get one question each and there's all sorts of things to raise, but listen to this. Albo was asked about some rugby league and about AFL, but even he was surprised he didn't get asked about the Shaq.
So we've got quite a lot more football questions to get to. Just checking that you're happy to...
I was expecting basketball questions today.
Oh, I'm sure somebody might come up with one of those.
But they didn't, Sophie. No one asked him about it.
Well, that's disappointing for the Australian public because Shaquille O'Neal's appearance at that press conference on the weekend has raised an awful lot of eyebrows, Chris.
It sure has. Thanks for joining us again, Sophie. Sophie Elsworth there. You can read her stuff in the Australian in the media section.